Good morning, everybody. Thank you all for joining for our first session today, which is about public key encryption. The first talk is about public key anamorphism in CCA secure public key encryption and beyond. And Giuseppe Persiano will give the talk.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so this is work about public key anamorphism in CCA secure encryption and beyond. And I'm Giuseppe Persiano, and this is joint work with Duong-Yu Pan from Paris and Moti Yung from New York. Okay, so let's start by I'll try to give you an idea why we want anamorphism in encryption. And we start from, let's start from the basic, like privacy is a human right, and more or less we all agree on this, I believe. And end-to-end encryption is one of the successes of cryptography. And for example, I just have the Signal app, which I regularly use, which encrypts end-to-end. But the success of end-to-end encryption relies on some assumption which might be challenged in some dictatorial states, and not only. Essentially, and this will look very silly, but encryption guarantees message confidentiality only with respect to people that do not have access to the secret key. Yeah, that's quite understandable. And essentially, we assume that the receiver keeps his secret key in a private location. This is realistic in most normal settings, but it can be, this assumption can be challenged in some, unfortunately, quite realistic setting. And there is a very nice cartoon from XKCD, which you can read, right there, is that you can keep it secret, but if someone comes to you and hits you on the head or hits one of your kids on the head, then it's very difficult to keep it secret. And of course, this end-to-end encryption is under attack not only in dictatorial states. This is a statement from David Cameron, then UK Prime Minister, which raises some doubts about end-to-end encryption. So it's in dictatorial states, but not only. And I think that we are pretty much aware of this war to cryptography. So a few years back, we proposed, like a couple of years ago, we proposed what we call the anamorphic approach. What is the anamorphic approach? Essentially, you have two modes of setting up an encryption scheme. The regular mode, which we all are familiar with, and the anamorphic mode. In the anamorphic mode, when you do the key generation, you generate a public key and two secret keys. One are called the innocent secret key, and the other are called the double secret key. And each ciphertext will carry two messages. One will be the innocent message, and the other will be the anamorphic message. And the idea is that the same ciphertext will give you, and that's why it's called anamorphic, depending on the key you use to operate on the ciphertext, will give one of the two messages. So there are two keys, but actually there is no second key, in the sense that the public key and the secret key are completely indistinguishable from regularly generated secret key. So you can plausibly deny that there is a second key because you say, oh, what do you mean? Like I generated using the key generation algorithm. And this is my secret key. And of course, the secret key will only allow the dictator to decrypt the innocent message. Okay. So an anamorphic encryption scheme actually, as I said before, consists of two encryption schemes. One is the regular, and the other is the anamorphic encryption scheme. And for all of these to make sense, and that's what the last few years of research have proved, it does not much make sense to construct a new encryption scheme that has this property. But actually what is interesting is to show that existing from the literature encryption schemes can be made anamorphic. Because now you can say, what, I'm using RSA OAP, or I'm using El-Gamal. All of these can be for anamorphic. But then they can be made anamorphic. So you can plausibly deny that you are using anamorphism. Okay. So how do you deploy an anamorphic encryption scheme? This is Bob that wants to deploy an anamorphic encryption scheme with Alice. So what Bob does, he has two modes, either regular key encryption and key generation, encryption, and decryption, or the anamorphic mode. The anamorphic mode is the more interesting mode of deploying such a scheme. So you run the equivalent of the anamorphic key generation, the anamorphic encryption, and the anamorphic decryption. And the anamorphic key generation returns, as you can see, the double key. The double key will then be transferred from Bob to Alice using a secret channel, a private channel. Once this has been achieved, Bob publishes his public key, keeps his secret key secret, unless the dictator comes and knocks on his door, in which case he will give the secret key, but not the double key, because there is no double key, essentially. And when I say there is no public key, he can plausibly deny, say, look, I generated this using El-Gamal's key generation. And this is the secret key and the public key that I got. Okay. Normal users use encryption and the public key. They don't know the public key is actually anamorphic public key, and they proceed as normal. Alice instead uses the anamorphic encryption scheme, and as you can see, it will pass the double key and the two messages. So one will be the innocent message, glory to our leader, and the other will be the secret message for Bob, something like, oh, we are going to have a meetup of our organization this time and so on, okay? So one is innocent loop. And the idea is that this ciphertext that is being computed using the anamorphic encryption algorithm is going to be intercepted by the dictator, decrypted by the dictator using the only key the dictator has, the secret key. The dictator will have the innocent and say, oh, good boy, Alice and Bob, good girl, Alice. And we'll be happy, and nothing will happen. Instead, Bob will receive the ciphertext, will apply the double key and the anamorphic decryption scheme, and we'll get, we'll meet up at 8 o'clock in this place. So that's more or less the idea. I want to make a distinction now for the purpose of this talk, and I want to make a distinction in the double key. So I'm going to split the double key into a receiver double key and a sender double key. As you can imagine, the sender double key is going to be used by Alice to encrypt, and the receiver double key is going to be used by Bob to decrypt. So sender encrypts, receiver decrypts. And still now, one of the two, the sender double key that is generated by Bob, must be sent to Alice on a private channel. So why am I making this distinction? Because now I make the following observation. Oh, okay, so this is the security notion, sorry. There is a security notion here. Okay, real game and anamorphic game. What you expect, that the adversary has an oracle encryption. In the real game, he provides two messages of his choice, the message and the anamorphic message, and he gets the encryption, and the oracle just forgets about the anamorphic message and just encrypts the message. In the second game, the adversary has access to an oracle, gives the oracle two messages. Now the oracle has also the secret key, the double key, and it encrypts both messages. And then we require these two games to be indistinguishable. And you see the adversary has D for dictator has both public key and secret key, so it cannot tell apart. So this is the game. So now we make the following observation. The scheme we started with is an asymmetric scheme. It's a public key scheme. But the anamorphic scheme we ended up with is actually a private key scheme. Why? Because there is some secret information that sender and receiver must share, which specifically is the sender double key. That part of the information must be transferred. So the question that we ask, is that, can we make this also the anamorphic scheme asymmetric? You can think that, you can imagine this will be very good, because now Alice and Bob, there is one point of failure because they have to communicate the double key on a secret channel. And now if we can do also public key anamorphism, there is no need. Alice and Bob don't even need to meet beforehand, right? So, okay. So let's see why this is important. Let's go to, we'll use the Naur-Jung encryption scheme, which is a good explanation of how you achieve anamorphism. So the scheme is on the, and I think most of you are familiar with this, but let's go very quickly over it. Essentially, the Naur-Jung scheme has the following. There is a public key that consists of two public keys in CPA, and the secret key, and there is a common reference string. So the encryption is very simple. You encrypt twice the message, and then you prove that the two ciphertexts that you obtain carry the same message. And you use that with the NISC, and the NISC uses the CRS, the string that is in the public key. The secret key is only one of the two secret keys, say SK0. So when Bob wants to decrypt, it checks the proof, and then it decrypts only the first ciphertext. So how you make it anamorphic? Essentially, you see there is some room, some maneuvering there, because there are two ciphertexts. So we'll do the following. We'll use one ciphertext. We'll have one ciphertext carry the innocent message, and the other ciphertext carry the anamorphic message. Now, of course, there is a problem, because you have to, the sender has to prove equality of the plain text. But this can be achieved, because now when Bob generates the CRS, he actually runs the simulator. Has a trapdoor, and the trapdoor will be the sender double key. So essentially, Bob does the following. Bob runs the simulator, gets a random string, puts a random string in the public key, has a trapdoor, gives it to Alice. Now Alice can use the trapdoor and fake the NISC proof. So now there will be two ciphertexts with the proof, with the fake proof that they carry the same message, and they carry two different messages. One carries the innocent message, the other carries the anamorphic message. So now Bob keeps both secret keys and decrypts both ciphers, so he can read both of them. The dictator instead, when he asks for the secret key, since the specification now Jung says, oh, you only keep one, I stuck, and then he goes to Bob, knocks on Bob's door, and says, hey, Bob, where is your secret key? Oh, this is the secret key. That's what the Naur-Jung tells me to do, and that's the secret key. And then the dictator doesn't see anything wrong with the ciphertext because the proof is simulated, everything is indistinguishable, and he only gets the innocent-looking message. Okay, but you see, here you really need, you still need Alice and Bob to talk ahead of time. Okay, so can we get around this? So there is this scheme, this encryption scheme, a CCA encryption scheme from a few years back, Crypto 19, from Coppola Waters, which I'm going to present here. Okay, it's a little bit overwhelming, but we'll go step by step. And we'll see that this scheme actually can be made public key anamorphic. Okay, so let's go step by step. So first of all, notice that there are two lambda, two security parameter public keys. Okay, good. This is interesting, okay? Also because the receiver, the legitimate receiver, and hence the dictator, only keeps half of the secret keys. And now you see, like, oh, there is something that we can use, because now we have two lambda public keys, we are going to have two lambda ciphertexts, and of these, only half the dictator can decrypt. So there is room to inject anamorphic messages. Now, okay, the dictator can only decrypt half of them, the one in teal. So it can decrypt, reconstruct K, which is a key for a special pseudo-random generator that will give you the randomness for other used for other encryption, for other ciphertext. But what is important is that these ciphertexts are semantically secure with respect to the dictator. Copula Water says to encrypt 0 in those ciphertexts. And now, okay, we know the trick. We're going to encrypt our own message there. So essentially, you use one of the I's for which your K will give you semantic security for the cipher, and you inject the message there. And what is interesting here is that, first of all, you can have theta lambda messages because, with a high probability you're getting, lambda over 3 message with the space, and we're going to see how to use this extra maneuver. But the important thing is now is that there is no shared information between sender and receiver. Essentially here, Bob, if you run it again in your head, here Bob just generates like Copula Waters. The only thing that he does, he keeps all 2 lambda secret keys. It does not destroy lambda of them as required by Copula Waters. And of course, this is indistinguishable to the dictator because it doesn't know how you generate. Actually, for example, there are some encryption schemes for which you can generate a public key without knowing the secret key. For example, El-Gamal, you can do that. So maybe like, if he knocks on the door, how did you generate this secret key? Oh, I just randomly selected a public key from El-Gamal and I don't know the secret key, God knows what it is. Okay, so essentially this makes anamorphism public key, and now Alice and Bob can exchange messages without prior communication. Okay, that's good. And this is also very efficient. And in fact, we can increase the bandwidth by using a sort of CAM-DEM mechanism here. We make the following. We use one of the slots to carry the double key, the ephemeral double key, and then we use that double key to encrypt the randomness, to generate the randomness. And the randomness that is generated now in the ciphertext is actually the ciphertext itself of an encryption scheme, could be private key encryption scheme with pseudo-random ciphertext. So we're going to have a key encapsulation method using the public key mechanism, the double key, and then this ephemeral double key will be used to decrypt the private key anamorphic scheme. But there is another question.
1 minute left. 1 minute left.
Yeah, and the final question that I want to ask is that there is this strange thing, like Naor-Jung and Copula Waters, they are both public key CCA. So why is that we are going to have this? Essentially, and I'll just give you the intuition, then encourage to look at the paper or talk to me. Essentially, if you look at the reduction, how it is done, the reduction itself has this capability of generating a public key for which they can decrypt and generate a ciphertext from a challenge ciphertext from the CPA. So when you do the reduction from CPA security to CCA security, the reduction itself is an anamorphic encryption scheme. And that's what we proved. There are some in the paper. So there are some conditions that you have to add, and, but more or less that's the thing. And there is also a subtle point of why some reduction give you public key encryption scheme, a public key anamorphic encryption scheme like Copula Waters, and why some give private like Naorium. And okay, so I want to conclude
Unfortunately, we need to wrap up. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. Oops. Oops. Oh, I went the other way. Okay, good. Okay, thank you.
Okay, since we are already a little bit over time, maybe take the questions offline.
Yes, of course.
Continue with the second talk, which is limits of black box anamorphic encryption. And Francesco Migliaro will give the talk.
Where's the remote? Here? Okay. Okay. Thank you for the introduction. Hi everyone, I'm Francesco. And I will present this paper, Limits of Black Box Anamorphic Encryption. This is a joint work with Dario Catalano and Emanuele Giunta. Okay, let's talk very quickly what is anamorphic encryption. Usually, in the regular public encryption context, we have that when two parties, say a sender and a receiver, wants to communicate, the receiver can just publish her public key, such that later the sender can use this receiver public key to encrypt a message and send the message to the receiver. And then later the receiver can decrypt this message, the ciphertext, using her secret key. And usually the privacy requirements that we ask for this kind of schemes is that an adversary that has only access to the public key cannot invert anything about the message. Okay, but what happens if this adversary is quite strong adversary, and we call it a regulator, that can ask also for the secret key to the receiver? Clearly the privacy is lost. And so the question is, how can we obtain privacy regarding to such a strong adversary? And this is when anamorphic encryption comes in rescue. Indeed, in the anamorphic encryption context, we have these three additional algorithms that are respectively the anamorphic generation, encryption, and decryption algorithm. And in this setting, the receiver can run the anamorphic generation algorithm in order to obtain an anamorphic public key and an anamorphic secret key, along with an additional key that we call the double key. And the double key is shared with the sender. And when the regulator asks for the secret key, the receiver can only give the anamorphic secret key to the regulator. And so when the sender wants to encrypt a message, but maintaining the privacy, in respect to the stronger adversary, he can use the anamorphic encryption algorithm along with the double key and send this anamorphic ciphertext. And then later, the receiver can decrypt this message using the double key. Okay. And the intuition is that this must be a regular looking encryption for the adversary. Indeed, the security of anamorphic encryption is expressed through two games. One game that we call the real game in which the key are generated with the regular generation algorithm, and also the message is encrypted with the regular encryption algorithm. While in the anamorphic game, we use the anamorphic generation algorithm to generate the keys, and also we use the anamorphic encryption algorithm to encrypt a couple of messages, the regular one and the anamorphic one. And we require that the real game must be computationally indistinguishable from the anamorphic game. Okay, so in the past, several construction has been given. This is not an exhaustive list, but just to give you an example, most of the construction are specific. With specific, I mean that they exploit some specific property of the underlying public key encryption scheme. For example, there is one based on the Naur-Young transform, other one based on this property of selective random recoverability, also on hybrid encryption, on also on specific schemes, and some also on reduction properties, Spino was saying. While for the generic construction, we have only one construction, that is the rejection sampling construction by Persiano, Pan, and Young, but it has a drawback. You can only send log lambda bits of anamorphic message. Actually, it's not the only generic construction. There is another one that is stateful, but to keep the presentation as simple as possible, I will not make difference between stateful and stateless anamorphic encryption, but in the paper we deal also with this kind of anamorphic scheme. But why we are interested in generic construction? Because as Spino said in the previous talk, we want to obtain anamorphism regarding already deployed schemes, and also because the adversaries are so strong adversaries that can also choose the public key encryption that he wants. And so the question is, for every public encryption, what can we do? What is the best that can we do, and if is a rejection sampling construction optimal? And so we studied a subset of possibly generic anamorphic encryption constructions that are the one that are black box. And with black box, I mean that the anamorphic encryption algorithms can only access the underlying public key to our oracle calls. And so we assume that if the oracle for the public encryption forms a correct and secure encryption, then the scheme with the anamorphic triplet is a secure anamorphic encryption. And we, in order to study the behavior of this black box anamorphic encryption, we picked an ideal public key encryption in which the generation algorithm and the encryption algorithm are truly random functions, while the decryption algorithm is just an inefficient algorithm that inverts the encryption function. So, okay. So we have studied how the anamorphic encryption algorithm behaves in respect to these oracles, and we proved the result that we call the ciphertext selection lemma, that essentially says that a sender and a receiver, if they want to communicate, they have to, the sender have to make encryption query to the encryption oracle, and then eventually choose one of them and send it to the receiver, such that later the receiver can do the same thing and obtain the message, the anamorphic message. Okay, and thanks to the ciphertext selection lemma, we can move to a simpler game that we call the random oracle channel. In this random oracle channel, we have two algorithms that are the sender and the receiver. The sender, both sender and receiver are not polynomially bounded, and they have also access to a random oracle, and they want to communicate a message. So the sender wants to send a message to the receiver, and the only way to do this is to make oracle calls to the random oracle and choose one of them and send to the receiver. And later the receiver can do the same thing to obtain the message. And we also require that the probability of obtain different messages to be negligible, and also that the receiver and sender can make only polynomial queries. So the question that we answered is how many bits they can communicate, and we have this bound that says that the the length in bits of the message that they can send each other must be logarithmic in the security parameter. Okay, thanks to the random oracle channel and the ciphertext selection lemma, then we can talk about the first main contribution of this paper. That is an upper bound for the anamorphic message bit that we can transmit using black box anamorphic encryption. Indeed, we can use the anamorphic sender and an anamorphic receiver in order to create a random oracle channel. So the random oracle channel sender wants to send an anamorphic message to the random oracle channel receiver, and he runs the anamorphic sender and simulates the oracle calls to the encryption scheme to the is-random oracle. And so when the anamorphic sender returns a ciphertext, the sender of the random oracle channel send it to the receiver, and so the receiver do the same thing, but for the anamorphic receiver. And so this is a random oracle channel because all the query for the that has been made to the encryption schemes are answered indeed with the random oracle, and they make only polynomial queries, and so we can apply the bound and obtain a bound for the anamorphic message bits that is of logarithmic function in the security parameter. So okay, let's move to the second main contribution of this paper. It's related to the notion of asymmetric anamorphic encryption. That is a notion in which the anamorphic encryption, anamorphic generation algorithm splits the double key into different keys, one to anamorphically encrypt and the other one, the trapdoor key, to anamorphically decrypt. And so the security properties is just a regular in CPA security, but in the anamorphic encryption context. And we require that the two keys must be computationally indistinguishable. And in order to study if this kind of construction can be made black box or not, we introduced this tool that we call asymmetric choice function. Asymmetric choice function, a choice function is just a function that outputs one of its input. And if it's symmetric, if for any permutation we have that the output is essentially the same. Or every permutation on the input, the output is essentially the same. And we used a nice property of this symmetric choice function that informally says that these functions are likely to choose always the same input to be their output. Okay, and so thanks to the ciphertext selection lemma and the symmetric choice function, we can say that the asymmetric anamorphic encryption in a black box way are indeed impossible. Indeed, we have an adversary which send the couple of messages to the challenger, obtain a challenge ciphertext back, and then he just run the anamorphic encryption algorithm and answer his query. But for just one random query, he replaced the real ciphertext with the one received from the challenger. And so since the anamorphic encryption algorithm can be treated as a symmetric choice function, it's likely to choose, again, the same ciphertext to encrypt the message M0. And so the probability that the two ciphertexts are the same is non-negligible, and the adversary can win the game. Okay, but the previous results holds only for the exponential meta space. So a natural question is, what happens when the regular meta space is only polycized? And the answer is that black box asymmetric anamorphic encryption with an exponential anamorphic meta space indeed exists. And we only need a public encryption with pseudo-random ciphertext. Okay, the construction is quite simple. We first produce the regular public key and secret key encryption, and then we use the other public key encryption scheme to obtain the double public key and the trapdoor key. And when we want to anamorphically encrypt a message, we just do some projection sampling using the public key encryption with pseudo-random ciphertext until we not obtain a ciphertext that decrypts the regular message. And in order to anamorphically decrypt, we just use the decryption algorithm of the public key with pseudorandom ciphertext. Okay, so in conclusion, we have showed that black box anamorphic encryption is limited to log lambda bits of anamorphic bits of communication, and so that the rejection sampling construction is indeed optimal, that black box asymmetric anamorphic encryption is impossible, and that our results are tight. And as our open questions, we ask ourselves what properties allow us to surpass the lower bound and in general this limitation. And that's all. Thanks for your attention.
Thanks, Francesco. Are there any questions from the audience?
We ever considered, sorry, can you? No, we have not considered robustness, but we made, the results holds for the weaker possible anamorphic encryption definition, and so we capture also stronger notion as a robustness and, for example, fully asymmetric anamorphic encryption and other things. So the results apply also to robustness.
Are there any more questions from the audience? Okay, then let's thank Francesco again. And we move on to the third talk of the session, which is formally verifying Kyber episode 5, machine checked in CCA security and correctness of MLChem in EasyCrypt. And Miguel Caresma will be giving the talk.
Thank you. Yeah, so today I'll be talking about formally verifying Kyber, episode 5, machine checked NCA security and correctness of MLChem in EasyCrypt. So what does this talk about? I'll start by providing the starting point for this work, which was episode 4, the previous paper. And then I'll provide some motivation for formally verifying cryptography. I'll then go over the process of standardizing Kyber, how we went from the Kyber draft all the way to the MLChem draft standard. And then I'll go over how we analyze the MLChem correctness and security properties using machine check proofs and how we connect them to optimized and verified implementations of MLChem in Jasmine. So our starting point was episode 4. Our paper titled Formally Verifying Kyber, episode 4, Implementation Correctness, published in Chess earlier last year, provided human audible formal specification of Kyber, and it included reference and optimized implementations of the Kyber scheme, the 768 parameter set in Jasmine, targeting the x86-64 architecture. Additionally, we connected these reference and optimized implementations with a formal specification using computer-verified proofs of functional correctness using the EasyCrypt proof assistant. However, there were a couple of things missing from this work. Namely, there were no analysis of the cryptographic properties of EasyCrypt or of Kyber using EasyCrypt, and our proofs targeted round 3 Kyber and not the MLChem standard. So what are our main objectives with episode 5? Well, of course, we want to migrate the existing Kyber implementations to MLChem, and this included or required adapting the proofs of functional correctness that I mentioned before to the MLChem draft standard. And additionally, we want to ensure that our interpretation of the FIPS 203 standard, where MLChem is included, is secure. We don't care about compliance yet, as MLChem was only a draft at the time of writing this paper, and compliance requires certification. Additionally, our goal was to consolidate the changes introduced to Kyber, now MLChem, in a single security proof, namely the changes introduced to the Fujisaki-Okamoto transform in the paper by Hövelmanns, and Kiltz in 2017. Really, our main goal is to derive that our implementations are an NCCA secure chem at the assembly level. Okay, so why is this relevant? If we look at the Kyber proposal in 2017, the public key compression included in the scheme invalidated a security assumption required for the underlying public key encryption scheme. Additionally, the tweaked Fujisaki-Okamoto transform used in the NCCA construction broke the security proof of the scheme in the QROM. Early implementations of Kyber, of this Kyber scheme, failed to perform implicit rejection by returning an error code. This was not caught by test vectors. In the SaberChem, there was a discrepancy in the implementation and the specification of the Fujisaki-Okamoto transform. In implementations of the NTT of Kyber targeting Cortex M4, there was an overflow that was not triggered by text vectors. And more recently, Kyber slash was a timing side channel that was found in Kyber implementations using the div instruction on secret data. And all of this is things that we could potentially avoid using machine check cryptography. So really, our main goal is to provide end-to-end formally verified cryptography. This includes security proofs for the schemes that we are targeting and functional correctness proofs for the implementations of these schemes. And then ideally, we want to link the two, meaning we want to ensure that the functional specification that these functional correctness proofs refer to matches the specification used in the security proof. And therefore, as I mentioned before, we want to derive that our implementations are secure. So what are our main contributions? Well, as I said, we provide a computer-verified proof of NCCA security of MLChem. This includes a proof of NCCA security down to a variant of MLWE, which we call hashed MLWE, and functional correctness proof of MLChem implementations in Jasmine, as I said, targeting the x86-64 architecture. As for the proof of NCPA security, we provide concrete bounds that consider low-level details, such as compression, SHA-3-based noise generation, and SHA-3-based rejection sampling. And we provide a formalization in EasyCrypt of the relevant FO transform introduced in the paper that I've mentioned before by Hövelmanns and Kiltz. And really, in the end, we get a concrete bound for the MLChem that considers all the low-level implementation details. Okay, so how did we get to the MLChem draft standard from Kyber? In 2017, Kyber was proposed as a lattice-based public key encryption scheme based on MLWE, and it included several optimizations, namely aggressive parameter choice and public key and ciphertext compression. However, there were some correctness and security implications. The correctness bound for the scheme was hard to compute, and there were only heuristic results for this correctness bound. The public key compression was not contemplated in the security proof, and it actually ended up breaking it. And the tweaked Fujisaki-Okamoto transform, which included the hashing of the ciphertext, as I mentioned before, actually broke the proof of security in the QROM. Fast forwarding to the round 3 of the Kyber NIST PQC competition, where Kyber was selected as the chem for standardization, the main differences from the initial proposal were updated parameters, so a smaller prime Q, and a smaller noise parameter eta. The public key was no longer compressed, and now the public keys were transmitted in the NTT domain. Additionally, we finally had a full specification of the Kyber scheme. However, the tweaked Fujisaki-Okamoto transform was still in use, as you can see in the picture, where the blue arrows point to the points where the ciphertext is hashed. Moving on to the MLChem draft standard, formerly known as Crystal Kyber, this follows now a typical design of post-quantum chems, where you have an NCPA public key encryption scheme built on top of a variant of LWE. And then we built an NCCA secure chem using the Fujisaki-Okamoto transform. And this is really what our work is built on top of. So this is an overview of our contributions. In red, you have the proofs of NCPA correctness and security for KPKE, which is the public key encryption scheme that underlies Kyber and MLWE. In blue, the proofs of CCA security for MLChem. And then in green, we have the proofs of functional correctness for the implementations of MLChem using Jasmine. And I'll now go over into each of these in more detail. So focusing on the INCPA construction, as I said, we provide a proof of INCPA security and correctness. And here, we prove the security of KPKE, which is a scheme that underlies Cabra and MLChem. And this is an abstract proof, meaning that this KPKE scheme is parametric on the noise distribution and the polynomial ring. And therefore, this proof applies to several parameter sets. The security proof, as I mentioned, is under a variant of MLWE, which we call hash MLWE. And here, really, the main difference is that we replace the sampling of the matrix A with a deterministic procedure H. Additionally, our correctness proof sets an upper bound for the decryption failure as a probability or the likelihood that the noise distribution generates values over a certain threshold. And this probability, or the concrete value for this probability, is still heuristic. Moving on to the proof of INCCA security, we provide machine-checked security proofs for MLChem. And here, the INCCA security of MLChem op, which you can see on the upper corner, follows from instantiating the Fujiyaki-Okamoto transform with concrete parameters. We use the public key encryption scheme that I mentioned before, and we instantiate it with the MLChem 768 parameter set. The security of this Fujiyaki-Okamoto transform itself is derived from a proof that shows the security of composing the T and U transforms introduced in the paper that I've mentioned several times before. Finally, zooming into the functional correctness proofs, we provide proofs of correctness for MLChem 768 implemented in Jasmine, targeting the AMD 64 or x86 64 architecture. And here, the Jasmine compiler gives us a couple of guarantees. Namely, that whatever we wrote in Jasmine is also what is implemented in the assembly. This is guaranteed by a proof of semantic preservation in the compiler. And we get guarantees that our code is cryptographically constant time via the type system of the Jasmine language. However, it's important to note that there's a gap between the security proof and our assembly implementation. Because in the specification used in the security proof, our hash functions are modeled as a random oracle. And in the implementations, they're instantiated using the SHA-3 512 hash function. So what is the result of this? Well, we can go all the way from an MLChem assembly implementation to a security proof of an INCCA security proof of this implementation in EasyCrypt. And therefore, as I mentioned in our contribution slide, we can derive that our assembly implementations are an INCCA secure chem. So why did we choose EasyCrypt for machine-checked proofs? Well, EasyCrypt provides us a couple of advantages, namely that the games and theorems and proofs that we write in EasyCrypt follow pretty closely to the ones that we find in cryptographic papers. We are able to write abstract proofs, such as the one for the Fujiyaki-Okamoto transform, that can be instantiated with different schemes and parameter sets. And EasyCrypt, as a single tool, supports not only cryptographic specifications, but also security proofs, implementations, and functional correctness proofs, all within a single tool. However, it has a couple of drawbacks. The proofs are not automatic, and they require a significant effort, even with quite a lot of expertise. And the theorems that we're trying to prove can be hard to read. So what are the main caveats or limitations of our work? Well, we have a large trusted computing base, so EasyCrypt, the proof assistant that I mentioned, is not formally verified. The EasyCrypt proof statements and the specifications are trusted by default, meaning we have to trust that they match whatever we're trying to prove. And namely, this problem with specifications can be fixed with machine-readable standards in the future. Additionally, our proof of security applies only to classical adversaries, meaning we have no security against quantum adversaries. So this leads us to future ongoing work. We want to update our implementations to now the final FIPS to a free standard. As far as the MLChem implementations themselves, we want to develop more efficient implementations and add support for more architectures and parameter sets. As I mentioned several times, we currently only support the x86 64 parameter set. We want to extend security the security proofs to the QROM. Improve for automation by integrating with other tools such as CryptoLine, which is used for proving algebraic properties about cryptographic implementations. We want to extend the formal verification to other primitives such as MLDSA, SLHDSA, and PhotoChem. And finally, we want to push for industry adoption of these formally verified implementations. If you're interested, you can check out more about the Umbrella project for Mosaic Crypto. Our paper for episode 4 and episode 5 are both available on ePrint. The specifications that I mentioned for MLChem are available in the GitHub repo for EasyCrypt specifications. And you can check out LibJade, which is our library for formally verified cryptography. And with this, I conclude my talk.
Yeah, thank you, Miguel. Are there any questions from the audience? I see one.
Yeah. Hello. Thanks for the great talk. So I sort of have two separate questions. The first is that, can you give an estimate for how many lines of code is in this formal verification effort and how many man hours that it took? And the second question is, you mentioned a possible machine readable standards. Could you elaborate more on what that standard looks like?
So as far as the first question goes, for lines, are you asking about lines including implementation and proofs or just proofs?
I guess whichever measure you think is the most appropriate.
So for proofs, I would say in the thousands of lines, tens of thousands probably. As far as man hours, if you combine episode 4 and episode 5, this took us around 3 years to do. Episode 4 was probably the biggest chunk of this time. It took around 2.5 years to complete for the functional correctness proofs. This is actually something that we're improving on with this integration with other tools such as CryptoLine. For episode 5, I would say it was around maybe a year of work, I guess, after episode 4.
And this is a year for multiple people?
Yeah, so both papers have around 15 authors, 12, 15 authors. So yes, quite a lot of people working on this. Some of them, though, working on the Jasmine compiler, some of them working on the EasyCrypt proof assistant. But yes. What was the second question, sorry?
What does the machine readable standard look like for the theorem statements?
The idea would be that you can take a standard and you can get maybe an EasyCrypt specification out of it automatically. Maybe you can write the standard in hexspec or something of the sort, yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, thanks, nice talk. Are you planning to counter also power attacks, also with masking maybe in future versions?
So there's been some work on trying to get a provable security or provably secure implementations against power side channels using EasyCrypt, but I think this is currently not doable. I'm not sure about this. We do have masked implementations, but we don't have proofs for this in EasyCrypt.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks a lot for the talk. I was going to ask about that gap between the proof that has random oracles and the implementation that has obviously hash functions.
Yeah.
So, like, how many random oracles does your proof have? And is there any verification of domain separation when moving to the instantiation?
So I'm not sure about the first question. As far as the second question goes, basically all we do is we replace a call to random oracle in the MLChem op specification with a call to SHA-3, and there's no proof of, we basically assume that they're equivalent. There's no proof that goes from one specification to the other. I don't know if this answers your question.
I guess it's only relevant if there's more than one random oracle, right?
Yeah.
If you instantiate more than one random oracle with SHA-3, then you want to make sure of that there's domain separation. I was wondering whether that was also a machine.
Yeah, so I'm not sure about this.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, then let's thank Miguel again. And we move on to the last talk of the session, which is provable security against decryption failure attacks from learning with errors. And Fabrizio Grisini will be giving the talk.
Hi everyone, thank you for the introduction. And today I'm going to present this joint work with Christian Mainz about the probable security against decryption failure attacks from LWE. So let's start by questioning ourselves why we are interested in this topic, of course. And camps have received a lot of attention due to the NIST process. And most of the proposals actually make use of the FO transform to upgrade the level of security. And at the same time, most of these proposals are not perfectly correct, so we need to handle with decryption failure. A possible solution to this is to introduce a notion of correctness that deals with decryption failure and test this notion for each PKE we are interested in. What we are going to do today, we're going to move the first step toward this direction and prove security of an improved version of the regular scheme against this correctness notion that I'm going to introduce soon. So let's start with the informal version of our main contribution. And so assuming that LWE is hard, we prove that there is no adversary that can exploit a given public key to find message randomness pairs that trigger a decryption failure more likely with respect of the given key that we respect with an independently generated one, of course, using as underlying PKE this improved version of the regular scheme. So this is an outline of my talk. I'm going to introduce the correctness notion I was talking about. Then I'm going to introduce the error distribution that we're going to use, quick description of the scheme, and then we're going to have an high-level description of the reduction. But let's start with the correctness game. So in a recent work, Hövelmanns, Hulsing, and Mainz introduced a family of security games called Find Fail in Plaintext, and today we are interested in a particular member of this family. So the Find Fail in Plaintext non-generic. The security game goes as follows. So challenger samples two key pair, so 0 and a 1, then flip a coin, and provide the adversary A with the first public key and a failure checking oracle with the key pair associated with the flipped coin. What the adversary has to do is to query the adversary only once with the message randomness pair, and the oracle will check if this pair triggers a decryption failures with respect to the given key pair. And with this information, the adversary should be able to determine which public key was used, which key pair was used. Let's get like a brief characterization of this notion. It's trivially achievable through perfect correctness. It's not that interesting because we're interested in decryption failure, but maybe something more interesting is that this notion is actually independent from CPA security. And an intuitive way to see this is that like in the game I just introduced, the adversary has some kind of control over the randomness, while in a CPA game this is not allowed. So now that we have our correctness notion, let's just define our error distribution. And throughout the talk, we are going to use discrete Gaussians. Like, what is a discrete Gaussian? Let's fix a lattice, and a discrete Gaussian is just like a continuous Gaussian with discrete support over the lattice. Why do we choose such a Gaussians? Because they behave pretty well. They have such a lot of nice properties under some condition of the so-called smoothing parameter. And what is this parameter? Let's say is kind of like a threshold such that if we are beyond the smoothing parameter, then the measure cannot distinguish the discrete structure. But then if we get too close, then the measure will notice the structure and we will lose some of these properties. To better analyze the Gaussians, we make use of a nice framework introduced by Janis, Michancho, Peikert, and Walter that uses only linear algebra to describe all the theorems and the experiment. And thanks to this, it generalized all the previous results, giving us like nice results on convolution and linear combination. Okay, now I'm gonna assume that you are all familiar with the LW problem. So I'm gonna go kind of fast on this. And this is the PVWD scheme that is an improved version of the Rege scheme introduced by Packard, by Kuntanathan, and Waters. And we use the subscript D to stress that we use discrete Gaussians as error distributions. Here, the key generation, we sample a matrix S that is private, then a public matrix A, and then an error that is sampled according to the discrete Gaussian in our case, and we define the matrix B that is going to be part of our public key. And we'll call this pair an LW sample. Then for the encryption of a message V, we use a randomness D and a function encode V. We can see this function just as a function that goes from a small ring of integer to a bigger one. And then in the decryption, we make use of decode that just is in some ways the inverse of the function encode, and we need this to cancel out a bit of the error that we had during the process of encrypting. Okay, now that we also have our scheme, let's move to a proper definition of our main result. So given an FFPNG adversary A with non-negligible winning probability, then we can define an LW adversary D such that the following inequality holds, where here gamma bar is the function that describes all the losses that we have during the reduction. In particular, is negligible in N, and also phi here is a parameter of the reduction that is fixed. So it holds for every phi, but for the reduction is constant. Okay, let's move on into like an overview of how the reduction works. So we have three main ingredients that we want to better analyze these probability distributions that we have to deal with. In particular, we want to describe a decryption failure condition, then get rid of the reduction modulo P. This will allow us to use better tail bounds and better bounds for the smoothing parameter. Then narrow down the possible strategies of the FFPNG adversary. And of course, thanks to this free ingredient, we will have a better idea of how to define the adversary, and then we will analyze this adversary. Okay, let's start with the decryption failure condition. As I said before, we make use of a pair of function encode and decode to move from a smaller ring of integer to a bigger one. So let's assume now that we are in the bigger one. And I just representing the element of this ring with these blue dots. And with the red dot, I'm just delimiting the amount of error that the decode function can cancel out. So it means that when we compute the decryption before applying the decoding, most of the time we are not actually on one point of the ring of integer, but we are a bit on the right or a bit on the left. And if we had too much error, and this error is actually determined by this inner product, then we can actually find ourselves to be in the wrong segment, and this will cause like a decryption failure. To be sure, like the notation is consistent here, I'm actually using E as a vector because we first prove the reduction for messages of length 1. And in this case, the error is not a metric, but is a vector. And then we generalize the result for messages of length polynomial in the security parameter. So at least this makes sense. So, okay, the decryption failure is given by this value. It should be smaller than a certain threshold. Okay, now that we have our decryption failure condition, we want to get rid of the reduction modulo P, and we just proved that the probability of getting to the tail of this distribution is negligible in N, so we can unwhip the distributions and just work over Z. This will give us a nicer bound. Okay, thanks to this, now we can move on to the last ingredient. and we ask ourselves which are the possible strategies that an FFPNG adversary can carry out to win this game. And we have mainly two possibilities. Once the adversary has a public key PK, they can try to trigger decryption failure for an independent key, so just ignoring the key that they have, or for the given key. With no surprise, the only possible strategy to get a non-negligible advantage is to trigger a failure for the key the adversary has. Okay, now we have all the ingredients that we need. We can define this LW adversary. So assuming that we have an FFPNG adversary with non-negligible winning probability, we define the adversary B as follows. The adversary gets as input a public key AB that might be an LW sample or a uniform sample, and it has to decide which one is the case. So the adversary will set a parameter of the reduction, as I said before, and this is probably the most important step of our reduction. Here, what the adversary does, it samples a new error, an error that the adversary knows, and use it to modify the public key. What is going to happen, so it's kind of an opposite of what happened with noise floating. In that case, we had an error to hide something, while in this case, we actually hiding an error to get information later. So the adversary actually modifies the public key, gives the modified public key to the adversary, and at some point, this adversary has to query the failure checking oracle with a message randomness pair. As we've seen before, the condition for decryption failure is independent of the message. It only depends on the randomness. And thus, with this randomness, the adversary first define a value k, and then combine the decryption failure condition and the value k to define what I call here an inner product threshold. This threshold will be the tool that the adversary uses to determine which distribution was used. Indeed, by now, again, as I promised, using the error that the adversary chooses before, they test if this value is above the threshold or below. In case the value is above, we can imagine ourselves in a position where the vector D and vector E prime are somewhat aligned, and so this inner product gets above the threshold, while with a uniform distribution, more likely these two vectors are going to be orthogonal. So this value is small. Now that we have our adversary, we have to analyze the winning probability, and what we want to do is that we want to prove that this event has a negligible probability to happen in case of a uniform distribution, and hopefully a non-negligible probability in case of an LW sample. We start actually with proving that this event is negligible in a case of an LW sample. I'm going to skip all the computation about the probability and the analysis of this. And then we managed to prove that, that in case of an LW sample, this probability is non-negligible. So thanks to these two results, putting everything together, we actually managed to prove that the advantage of the LW adversary is non-negligible. And again, as I said before, we first proved the theorem for messages of length 1, and then by using mainly the union bound and just some small changes, we were able to extend the result for messages of length polynomial in N. So now we have this result for the Regev scheme, and our goal is now to move forward and try to prove a similar reduction for this scheme introduced by Lindner and Packard that make use of the LW assumption, both for the key generation and for the encryption. And this means that in the process, we are adding more error, so we need to deal with more error. So the analysis will get a bit more complicated. And of course, we would like to extend then the result to ring LWE, model LWE, finally to get to analyze Kyber. So that's all for me. If you have any questions, more than welcome.
Thanks, Fabrizio. Are there any questions from the audience? Okay, then maybe I have a question. You already mentioned that it would be super nice to also be able to analyze Kyber.
Yes.
Could you maybe expand a little bit on the roadblocks on the way to do so?
Yes, so the idea now is that the decryption failure condition in the Regif scheme was kind of nice. It's just like an inner product, and there's only one error. And also in the extension, you can just consider the per symbol error, and so you will always deal with an inner product. And now moving to something that looks like more Kyber, then we have to deal with, as I said, a bit more error, and yeah, they have like different rules in the overall schemes. So we have to pay even more attention in the analysis and how to deal with them.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
Are there now some questions from the audience? I don't see any. Okay, I guess then we can close this session a little bit early and head on to have coffee.